Does this Royals team have the capability of putting it together for 162 games? Let's talk about it next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. You want to know a little bit more about me? Well, I work here in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week over there and stay very busy in the producing world. So sports pretty much is my entire life. I talk about all kinds of sports, not just baseball. But you know, when you come click on this podcast link, that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, as they are just 12 days away from opening day. And we're going to have so much to get into next week, as it'll be the final week of spring training for not just the Royals, but everybody in baseball. And then they'll have that exhibition game in Northwest Arkansas and gear up, or I guess head back to Kansas City to take on the Minnesota Twins for a 3-game series beginning on March 28th. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. We know that conference tournaments are wrapping up this weekend, and March Madness is right around the corner. Next week is when all the games will be starting, or at least the first couple of games will be starting. They'll have those playing games in Dayton, Ohio, and then you're going to have the first and second round games taking place next weekend. So why not go create your FanDuel account and start winning some money? But more importantly, use our code of Locked On so you can really get a big time payout. But we'll have more on that coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Well, if you're watching on YouTube, or maybe you can tell if you're listening on a podcast link, surprise, surprise, the connection bit me in the butt once again. So instead of trying to just postpone again, because I promised an episode today, I promised an episode tomorrow, I had to go to another location, had to go to a buddy's house and record here in a bedroom. So no, I do not have the Royals background behind me. So if you're usually a YouTube listener or YouTube watcher and you're watching on or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts today, you're not missing much. There is just a bed behind me, some lamps behind me, and a giant white wall behind me. So nothing standing out really, but all I care about is getting through this episode with no connection issues. And how ironic is that? We were just talking about it in yesterday's episode, how everything was going well. It really was. And a quick upload time, didn't have any hiccups. And then this morning tried to record and couldn't even get through 5 minutes of an episode before stuff started hitting the fan. So I just said, I don't have time to do this later on tonight. So I got to figure out a way to get this done. And hopefully I'll be back to the normal background and everything's back to normal tomorrow. We're having people out to come and check on it. So if that doesn't work, I'm just going to ditch that Wi-Fi company I'm using and go and upgrade somewhere else, because it's getting pretty tiresome. But as long as we can get this one out today, bear with me with the bland background, or if you're watching on YouTube or the audio doesn't sound as smooth. We're working on it. It has been quite a tough week, but I'm tired of dealing with it at my house, so I got to make it work somehow. And I had some stuff I wanted to talk about today and have a lot of energy for, so I didn't want to postpone that to tomorrow and just wait to do 2 episodes tomorrow. We're still going to get everything we want to get into today. Starting with a question I got from a listener earlier in the week about this Royals team, about their expectation, about what we may encounter in this 2024 season. Now, in regards to this baseball team, we understand that there is quite a range as to what they can become. They could be a division winner. All things go right, I will stand by that. If all things go right, if guys overachieve, if health is not a concern for them, they can win anywhere from 85 to 88 games. I was just on a podcast, Baseball Isn't Boring. You can check that out on their website and all their podcasting links. And I was asked that question about what's the outlook for this team. And I do think it's a huge range. They could win 85 to 88 games. They could lose 95 to 97 games. There is a giant gap as to what this team can be. And it's going to come down to this question that was posed to me by a listener. Can they put it together for 162? How many lulls are they going to have? How many highs are they going to have? How many lows are they going to have? And that, to me, is what separates you from being a really bad team, a mediocre team, a good team, a really good team. You're hoping the Royals can get into that good team category this year. We know they're not going to be really good. That's reserved for the Atlanta Braves or the Los Angeles Dodgers or the New York Yankees or the Philadelphia Phillies. We know that is their thing. They are the really good baseball teams. But this Royals team can be good. Okay, they can weather some storms. They can avoid those 10-game losing streaks that always nip them in early April. They can avoid losing 5, 6, 7 series in a row. I think they've got the depth, pitching-wise for sure, to avoid things like that. Now, as we are just 12 days away from opening day, I've been cycling through a lot of the same topics and what I can talk about. And I'm sure that for those of you listening, you're going, well, what else can you talk about at this point? We've done pretty much a preview of the entire roster. We've gone over position battles. We've gone over bullpen battles. We've gone over coaching things. We've gone over statistical numbers. There's not much more we can talk about with this team other than just expectation. That's kind of what's reserved these final 12 days. What else can we say about this team? We have run it into the ground a little bit. But for this team to put it together for 162, it is really going to fall, in my opinion, on the backs of this offense, quite honestly. I think that, you look at the rotation, you look at this bullpen, there's enough guys and I think enough depth to weather some storms. They could throw Michael Walk out there. If he doesn't have his best stuff, I feel confident Cole Reagans or Seth Lugo will. Didn't really have that last year. In the bullpen, now you can turn to a number of guys that have done it at the big league level, unlike last year where you couldn't really rely on anybody. The offense is where a lot of it is going to, dictate how good the Royals are. I mean, you are going to have Bobby Witt Jr. You're going to have Maikel Garcia. You're going to have Vinny. You're going to have Sally. Those 4 guys are the givens to me. Then you have a little bit of the unknown. And those other 5 guys, to me, is going to tell us, is going to answer the question, can they put it together for 162? Because we always talk about pitching. We always talk about bullpen, blowing games, good starts, quality starts. That's all fine and dandy. I'm really not overly concerned at this point about the lack of pitching for the Royals. They went out there and significantly upgraded where they were. I'm not saying they're the best in the American League. Considering where they were, it was bottom floor. They have significantly upgraded. The offense, I'm not sold significantly upgraded. They didn't add a premium bat in the lineup. Now, you can count Vinny Pasquantino as a new addition because he was hurt basically all of last year, but he's been there. It's not a true addition. Hunter Renfroe was really the only true starting addition they made. They're still rolling with Kyle Isbell. They're still rolling with MJ Melendez, Michael Massey. So it's up to those guys to say it's not going to be a top-heavy lineup. It's going to be a struggle 1 through 9 to face the Royals lineup. And that, my friends, is where you can see this team putting it together. I'm excited. I'm stoked for it because spring training numbers can look good. Off-season talk can sound good. Projections, optimism, we all feed into that. We love that. But it's all talk. None of that boosts you for 2024. It only boosts you inside the mind of a fan. Right? I have been preaching MJ Melendez. It won't matter unless he does it. Right? Isbell, I can say, well, he's got a full season of health now. And if he's just a league average hitter, he'll be a really good center fielder. Well, show me your league average hitter. They've raised the floor. You've heard me say that over and over again, raising the floor of this team. But that's not putting it together for 162. Putting it together for 162 really falls on the 5 guys I just talked about. That, to me, is going to be the difference. Not overly concerned about the rotation at this point. I may be down the road. I may be concerned about the bullpen down the road. But to me, if you can see this offense become a very gritty, a very tough 1 through 9, it's going to take so much pressure off the rotation, so much pressure off the bullpen. And that is what I'm going to be looking for. And that, quite honestly, is how I see them putting it together for 162. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, the Royals acquired a new prospect in their system. And honestly, for Samad Taylor, feels like a pretty good return. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're into betting on a big upset on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets. It's your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. That's the most exciting thing about this all. I'm going to be filling out a bracket. I'll be doing the ESPN Tournament Challenge. Might make 4 or 5 of them just so I can enter in as many as I can. But once I start losing in the first and second games of the weekend, well, then it kind of takes away the power of it, right? It takes away the fun of it sometimes. FanDuel lets you keep betting, lets you keep having the opportunity to win money, and use that code of Locked On MLB, because those are great opportunities out there for you to win some money. It can be point spreads, can be upsets. Have fun with it, but just go over and create your FanDuel account today so you can be geared up and ready to go for March Madness, which begins next week. And again, just a reminder, if you are watching on YouTube and you're wondering what happened to the background, where am I doing this podcast from? I'm at a buddy's house. I was not able to get the connection up and running this morning. Shocker, surprise, been terrible all week long. Very frustrated about it. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast, the audio is not that good. Well, I'm sorry. I don't have my mic here. I don't have everything that I'm usually used to. Hopefully these people come into my house tomorrow can fix the Wi-Fi problems, and we're not going to have to deal with this anymore. So this is what I got for you today. I know it has been, quite honestly, one of the weirdest and toughest and most strenuous weeks of Locked On Royals in recent memory, not having episodes on timely days, timely moments. We're just kind of trying to piece this together. It's like putting duct tape on a dam, on a broken dam. We're going with what we got here. But we're still going to try to give you 2 really good episodes to close out the show. Second segment we're going to talk about today, I think I said episode there. Second segment we're going to dive into today is the trade that happened yesterday. Or not really the trade that happened yesterday, but the Royals finding out their return for trading Samad Taylor to the Seattle Mariners a couple of weeks back. And I don't know what I was expecting. I'm not sure the type of player I thought would be a good return. I didn't immediately go through the Seattle Mariners prospects ranks, their farm system, and go up and down and go, that makes sense for Samad Taylor. That makes sense for Samad Taylor. No, I didn't do any of that. Honestly, when that trade happened, I said they cleared up a spot for Adam Frazier, and we're going to move on with it. Whoever they get this player to be named later, probably going to be some fill-in guy for AA or AAA. Not much other than that. But then the name comes out yesterday, and I'm probably going to get this wrong. I'm going to do my best to pronounce this name correctly, and I'm hoping I'm like 95% there. But Nathaniel Garabitos, I think, was the best I could do. So he comes over from Seattle. He's a 23-year-old, was in high A. And I went and looked at the numbers. I think you would say pretty typical for a 23-year-old in high A. Big strikeout. And you go, well, why is he 23 and still in high A? Well, he doesn't have great command. He walked, I think, over 6 guys per 9 last season. But the strikeout numbers were there. So that intrigued me, right? Big strikeout numbers are always going to intrigue me. Because A, you either have a really good wipeout pitch, a really good put-away pitch, or B, you've got an elite fastball. And that happened to be true for Garabitos. In fact, Baseball America back in December ranked the pitches for every Seattle prospect, right? Who's got the best curveball? Who's got the best slider, the best cutter, best changeup? Best fastball in the Mariners farm system was Garabitos. He can run it up to triple digits, 100, 101, 102. And that, folks, is all I needed to hear. That's all I need to hear about this trade. Okay, I can like Samad Taylor for who he was, the story he had, having a really cool moment in his major league debut, the walk-off sac fly, and the come-from-behind win against the Angels to snap the 10-game slide last year. I rooted for Samad Taylor. I like Samad Taylor a lot. In fact, I wasn't stoked that when they signed Adam Frazier, he was the odd man out, but I also digested it and said, well, who else? Who else was going to be moved off that spot? Was Samad Taylor going to be up in Kansas City a lot this year? My answer would have been no. Okay, he had a chance last year to showcase himself, to earn a spot, not only for that year, but for next year. You know, kind of showcase that I can be the super utility guy for you. And nothing really popped to me. His batting average was low. OBP was low. Power numbers weren't really there. You know, defensively didn't really stand out. There wasn't anything I was looking at and saying, you got to keep him around. Plus, a little bit more of an aged prospect. You look at him at, 24, 25, 26 years old. How much longer are you just going to hold a roster spot? Especially with this offseason that you've had where you've been bringing in a lot of free agent talent. You got to make some tough decisions. This return makes me feel a lot better about it. If this was some 26-year-old in AA, had a 40-grade fastball, nothing really stood out. Maybe he had great numbers as a 26-year-old in AA, but he's a 26-year-old in AA. You know, he should have good numbers. He's facing 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds. And that kind of is the same here for Garabitos. He's 23, facing 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. He's a little bit older, but the fastball is always going to catch your eye. You throw triple digits, I don't care what your command is. Okay, you can work with that. And the Royals pitching department has slowly started to build some commodities. That's the best way I can put it here. They're starting to raise some eyebrows here. I mean, for instance, it was earlier this week, Eric Sarantola had the chance to throw and was consistently sitting 97, 99. You know, how many of you out there that pay close attention to the Royals know who Eric Sarantola is? That's a draft pick from a couple of years ago. So that can happen in the Royals system here. We're seeing them be more accepting of the data, and we're seeing them find more guys, turn guys into something. And this is such a good return, in my opinion, because you find a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, you work with it. It's the same thing with Steven Cruz last year. Steven Cruz did not look great in a Royals uniform, but he throws 99, 100, 101. You work with that. You know, Dylan Coleman came over from San Diego. He didn't turn into much, and we all know how that ended up in Kansas City. But you take a chance on that fastball. But this is a guy who was given the best fastball in the Mariners system. And the way you acquired him was through Samad Taylor. Samad Taylor may not even play in Seattle this year. Now, clearly Seattle, they can trade a guy like that because they feel good about finding more guys like Nathaniel Garabitos. But I just think you've got someone to work with there. Now, I think Royals, scouts, pitching farmhand people, coaches, they are going to look at a guy like this and go, let's see what we can make of him. You know, it's like Play-Doh almost. Might be the first time I've ever mentioned Play-Doh on the podcast episode before. It's like Play-Doh, right? They come to you, you make them what you can. You've got a vision. You've got this idea of what you want to create with the Play-Doh, or dough for that matter. If you're making bread, I don't really care. But you've got really good Play-Doh, a really good dough. Every pitcher that throws 99, 100, and 101 does not have pinpoint control. Like, you go out there and try not to go after a Hall of Famer here. The main issue for flamethrowers is always going to be throwing strikes. And for Garabitos, he doesn't throw strikes, but he strikes out a lot of guys. I shouldn't say he doesn't throw strikes. He doesn't throw a lot of them. He strikes out a lot of guys. He walks a lot of guys. But you have a high-powered fastball like that, teams are always going to want to take a chance on you, and the Royals certainly did, and the only thing they had to give up was Samad Taylor. Okay, before we move on to our final segment of the show, I want to give a shout-out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with your local experts of Locked On. Now, a reminder of this, you can find Locked On Sports Today available on the free TV, for the free Fire TV channels app, and we're going to have a little bit more on them coming up after the break. But that's Locked On Sports Today with that 24/7 coverage, and go and subscribe right after finishing up this podcast episode today. When we return, who's going to be the fireman for the Royals bullpen this year? I'm going to tell you who next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the other sponsor today in Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the free Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV, so you can have all that access to games, shows, movies. Go and get set up today with Amazon Fire TV. Well, with a bullpen, you know that you're going to have guys designated to certain roles. You're going to have your setup guy. You're going to have your closer. You're going to have your long relief guy. Then there's this role of the fireman. And I'm glad I was able to incorporate this into today's episode, because once again, it was a listener asking me the question of, well, who's the fireman going to be this year? Last year was tough to identify one because they were always putting out fires, and you couldn't put one guy in there to put out the fires all the time because his arm was going to fall off, right? There were too many issues with the Royals starters and the bullpen to really put down a fireman guy for the bullpen. There were times it was Scott Barlow. There were times it was Carlos Hernandez. There were times that it was Aroldis Chapman earlier in the year. Then it was James MacArthur. Everybody took a turn. But the fortunate part about revamping your bullpen is you get a fresh start. You get a fresh start. You get to figure out where everybody's comfortable. And I do think right now the Royals are slowly identifying who's going to go where. Now, I'm not 100% certain where each and every guy is feeling the best right now, but I have some form of a vision as to what I think will happen. Let's start it up top let's go the closer role here. I think it's going to be Will Smith. They brought in Will Smith with closing experience. Do not think he's going to slide into the setup role. I think to begin the year, he is going to be this team's closer. When they've got a lead, and if things are going well, and he's pitching well, he's going to be the closer. The setup, in my opinion, is going to be a combination a little bit of James MacArthur. I think at that point, you can just see James MacArthur taking that type of role and running with it. I think James MacArthur can be the most consistent and reliable arm in this bullpen to begin the year, mainly because he was so good to close the year, and he's been fantastic this spring. And I would not be shocked that if Will Smith doesn't do that well, or maybe James MacArthur's looking really good, that Matt Quatrero makes that decision to move him to the ninth inning spot. I could also see a setup guy being, a John Schreiber. I could see the setup spot going to Chris Stratton. I could see the setup spot going to Nick Anderson, though he didn't look that good the other day against Cleveland and Goodyear. I don't see it being anybody like Matt Sauer unless he has that transformation in year one. I would like to see Carlos Hernandez or John McMillan grab that spot later on in the year. Maybe more so McMillan than Hernandez, because we saw Hernandez struggle in that role last year. But for now, I think the ninth and eighth inning spot is going to be maybe interchangeable as well between James MacArthur and Will Smith. I think that feels very firm at this point. So that leaves me the fireman spot, and it's going to be a guy I actually just mentioned. I think John Schreiber is this team's fireman. And there's a couple different qualities to a fireman. Number one, they can throw a lot of given nights. Like, you could throw them on Monday to get you 2 outs. They're ready to go for an inning or two the next night out, which also brings into the conversation Chris Stratton, who threw over 80 innings last year between Texas and St. Louis. So he's got the rubber arm, but I don't really know if it's a true fireman type of pitcher. I don't know if Chris Stratton's arsenal plays in a fireman's role. Like, a fireman's role to me has to have the put away stuff. Either has to have a funky arm angle or overpowering stuff. Because we know what the fireman's role, if I'm just saying that role over and over again, you're like, I don't know what the hell that means. It's putting out the fires. Bases loaded, 1 out. Here comes the fireman. 2nd and 3rd, nobody out. Get us out of there with only 1 run. You know, that's going to be the guy. And to me, I think John Schreiber fits that role really, really well. And he had one kind of shaky outing in spring, but has been really good since. And he does have that funky arm angle. And those guys are always the toughest to hit. When you have runners in scoring position, you bring them in out of the bullpen. It's like, now we got to face this guy. We got to face a 3/4 guy, a sidearm guy, a submarine guy. Or you bring in a flamethrower, and it's like, well, that is no fun for me, the hitter. I had to face a guy that's coming in breathing fire, 100, 101, and I got to try to drive in a run. And I don't believe the fireman is ever really suited for, like, the setup role. Like, it is a very specific spot for the bullpen. Like, if it's the 5th inning, I'm going to John Schreiber. I'm not going to James McArthur because I don't want to burn James McArthur in the 5th inning. I don't want to burn Will Smith. I don't want to burn Stratton. Like, Schreiber, I feel like you could throw 4th inning, 5th inning, 6th inning, 7th inning, maybe the 8th inning if he has to. It's flexibility. A lot of different ways you could input that arm into that situation. And Schreiber's done it before in Boston. He had to be a fireman. You can throw a lot of innings. You do not need to be a high strikeout guy. You do need to throw strikes, okay, which is why somebody like a Carlos Hernandez makes me feel iffy about that, or maybe even McMillan. They've got the power stuff. They've got the high-velocity fastball, but if you come in bases loaded, 1 out, you got to throw strikes. I'm not going to sit around for you to find the zone, to find your touch. John Schreiber's throwing strikes. He's just serving up ground balls. He's got his sinker. He can have the control. He's got the slider, the put-away pitch. If you go to Stratton, he's got the rubber arm. You could have him get out of a jam and then throw the next inning. So get 5 outs in an outing. It's such a fascinating role to me because the Royals have had successful guys there before. Like, Scott Barlow was a fireman before he became a closer. Now, I also think that Luke Hochevar, which is what this listener brought up to me, like, who's going to be the next Luke Hochevar? Because Hoch was the fireman in 2015. Now, that bullpen was so ridiculously loaded. I mean, man, who wasn't a fireman? You could put Wade Davis in that spot or Kelvin Herrera and been just fine. But Hoch thrived in that role. You bring him in there, get out of it. And you're very thankful. You're very fortunate to have a good fireman. And the Royals have gone a long time without a good fireman. And I think John Schreiber can be that guy. He is my most intriguing guy for this bullpen. Because if he returns to that form he was 2 years ago in Boston, that's a nice weapon to have. More specifically, that's a nice fireman to have. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And before we say goodbye, just one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Again, apologize for the bland background, just a white wall here. Apologize for some okay-ish audio. I can't guarantee anything, but hopefully we can have our normal setting back tomorrow. If not, still bringing you another episode of Locked On Royals. And a reminder, they're on TV tomorrow night, and Cole Reagans will be throwing, so go be sure to check that out. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.